Hello everyone and welcome to another Fusion 360 Live. My name is Brad Tallis from Autodesk. Today's topic I'm going to be talking about drawings, tips, and tricks. And the reason I'm doing this one is because I've been getting some questions from customers on certain topics in drawings, and I wanted to show some neat examples of what you can do with the drawings workspace. So Angelo is not helping me today. He just got back from working with BattleBots in Las Vegas. It sounds like he was insanely busy and all that kind of stuff, so he's taking some well-deserved time off right now, but he should be back next week. So I'll be running the questions myself. So once again, if you have a specific question, maybe put like 3 asterisks or 3 stars in front of it, so as I'm scanning through I can find those really quick. Also, I notice a lot of the people online help answers those questions, and I really do appreciate that. This is such an awesome community, everybody working together, everybody asking how everybody's doing. So that's why we come back and we try and do these as often as we can. So let's dive right in. So what I'm going to be doing is talking about drawings, and I'm going to use my miter saw stand as an example. And I'm going to show some new functionality or some functionality you might not know exists. So I'm going to create a drawing of this. So I'm going to come into my workspace tab here, or button, and go to Drawing from Design. Now, what I wanted to point out is this option right here. This is really cool. By default, it's usually set to full assembly, and that means it's going to create a drawing of the whole assembly, even if parts are turned off. Well, now there's an option in here called visible only, and by doing that, it is only going to create a drawing of what's actually displayed. So it's kind of an easier way of specifying what you want your drawing to look like even before you get into the drawing workspace. And then finally we also have select, which allows you to pick a particular item, and that's going to allow you to select that one item or multiple items. I'm going to do visible only in this example here. I can specify, we're gonna talk about templates and all this kind of stuff a little bit later. I can specify my standards. I'm gonna do ASME, but I'm gonna leave my units to be millimeters, specify my sheet size. So by defining ASME, I see these sheet sizes. If I were to do ISO, I would see these sheet sizes. So I'm gonna just start, let's do maybe like a D size drawing. And I'm just going to say OK. Now it takes a moment. You'll notice I only have 1 tab open right now, and now there's 2 tabs. So it actually creates the drawing in a separate tab. It's going to use my default title block, and then you'll notice I get this little icon stuck to my cursor, and it's asking for me to place this base view. I'm going to go ahead and click there to kind of place it. I'm going to move this just in case any video stuff is covering it up, so you can kind of see the options here. I'm going to change my scale from 1 to 10 to 1 to 8, and you'll notice it kind of gets a little bit bigger. Now here's a cool tip. If you didn't know this, you can click these 3 little dots and it actually has a whole bunch of predefined scales in here. So sure enough, there was a 1 to 10 in there I could have selected, but also notice like the architectural, fractional, etc. But I could also come in and type anything I want. I could say like 1 to 7 if I wanted to, and that's not in the pull down list. So you can put whatever scale you want. I'll just go ahead and say OK. So I'm placing this base view, and we're going to be talking about what you see over here quite a bit today. I'm going to go ahead and create some projected views really quick. So here's my parent. I'll just kind of go up to the right, and maybe I'll do like an isometric up here in the corner. I'll go ahead and click that green box saying that I'm done selecting those. So It's going to update all of these views, and what it's going to do is it's going to use the settings that were used in this first base view. So if I had said show hidden lines, these other ones would have shown hidden lines. Okay, now here's one of the tips that's kind of not a lot of people know about. In fact, I just learned about this recently. Now, obviously, you know, if you drag the parent view, these other views are going to try and stay projected with them. So my top view is staying lined up with my parent view. So you can kind of see as I move that around, that top view is staying lined up. Same thing with my side view, it's staying lined up. Well, there might be situations where you want to move one of these views. Even though it's a projection, you might want to move it. So what you do is you just click and drag, and you'll notice it limits you to only moving up and down. But if I hit the shift key, in fact, notice if I pause for a second, it says press shift to toggle view alignment. So I'm going to hit my shift key, and now I can move this view wherever I want. And if I want to put it back, I just hit the shift key again, and I'm back to being lined up. And we're actually going to use this later on in today's demonstration. There's multiple times where I do like section views, and it limits where you can put the section view, and I'm like, I don't want it crowded right here. Maybe I want it over here, or maybe I want it up in this area. So you're going to see that here in just a little bit. Okay, so here is where you have a little bit of power. So I'm going to right click on this table assembly over here in this browser, and I'm going to say suppress all except selected. Now if you want to remember anything from today's session, this is it, because you don't know how many times I'm watching customers and they want to just show the table assembly, and they come in and they click there, and then they click there, and then they click there, and they click there. And this is a simple example. They've got 20, 30, 40 parts or whatever, and they're manually clicking all of those to turn them off. Instead, I can right mouse click and say suppress all except what's selected. So watch what happens. It turns all of those checkboxes off, and it's going to update all of my views. And now you'll notice it is only displaying what is underneath this table assembly. So here's the different tubes. In fact, you'll notice if I hover over tube, it kind of highlights it in each of the views. It's kind of hard to see, but it kind of turns dashed as I hover over these parts. So I can actually kind of see where is the end cap assembly. And it's right there, right? So that right mouse click and suppress all except selected, I think that's huge. If you like that, give it a thumbs up. Hopefully you all knew about that. So, okay, so I now have kind of this, I would call it like a sub-assembly. It's not the whole thing. It's just part of my design. I'm going to go ahead and move this up a little bit. And I'm going to create a table. So right here, I'm going to say table. Let me move this so you can kind of see what's going on here. Notice this says automatic. Now if I click on this, you can see the different kinds of tables that we have. Custom table, a parts list, or a bend table. So automatic, it's going to kind of figure it out itself. Then notice the structure. It says first level or all levels, and we're going to talk about this. I'm going to leave it at first level, and then I'm going to move my cursor around, and you'll kind of notice as I move around, it's going to kind of snap to the upper right corner. Now it's kind of snapping to the upper left corner. Maybe if I place it down here, you'll notice it kind of snaps to the lower left corner. So I'm just going to get near this corner here and click. And notice what it did. It created these balloons for me automatically. And it's kind of highlighting the top level. So we can kind of see under the table assembly, it's showing we have 2 tubes, quantity 2. We have 2 end cap assemblies, quantity 2. And then we have like this single center tube, and then we have these leg assemblies. It's kind of like one level. it is not showing all of the parts inside the leg assembly. It's literally only pointing to the leg assembly. So that's what first level does. It kind of allows you to kind of point to certain things and say, okay, this is a subassembly called, the end cap assembly, etc. Now we're going to obviously talk about the full level assembly here in just a little bit. Okay. Now what I want to do is I'm going to leave this kind of as my first sheet. And again, we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about renumbering these balloons and positioning them and pointing the arrows in different locations. I'm just kind of hitting a couple of the high level things right now, and then we're going to dive a little bit deeper. So another trick or tip is that you can add a new sheet just by clicking on this little plus icon. But if I right mouse click, you'll notice I also get add sheet if I wanted to. But I just hit this little plus icon and it's going to create a new sheet. Okay. I'm going to create a new base view. And it looks pretty much just like what we did before. And I'm going to set I'll do the pull down this time. I'll say 1 to 8. I'll go ahead and place my top, front, right, ISO, etc. So, and again, what I was talking about earlier, notice the style is visible edges only. It's not displaying tangent edges, etc. If I had said hidden lines, it would show all the hidden lines. I'm not going to do that right now. I'll just say OK. Maybe move this view over here a little bit, and I'll do my projected views, just like I did on the previous sheet. Like so. I'll say OK. I'm going to do that table once again. But this time we're going to do the all levels, and this will be kind of interesting when we do this. So why is it taking a long time to update these views? Well, it's literally showing every single part. It's displaying whether they're hidden or not, tangent edges, etc., threaded edges, so you can kind of see why sometimes it might take a little while, a few seconds, to generate these views. Okay, so I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to say create a table, but this time I'm going to say all level. And notice what happens. I'm going to go ahead and place my table here. I get all of these balloons all the way around. And in fact, I'm going to zoom out and you can kind of see a huge long table, because now it is showing every single part, whether it's mirrored or not. Here's the bolts, lock pins, springs, washers, etc. All of the stuff is in here. Now, obviously, we just made a pretty ugly drawing, but here's some cool things you can do with this. So I'm going to right-click on the table assembly. And just like I did before, I'm going to say suppress all except selected. Now notice it's showing the wheels, it's showing the extension arms, everything like that. Well, all I'm really concerned about right now is this table, kind of this top part here. So I'm going to suppress all except for the selected. Now you'll notice it takes a second here. The table will actually get shorter because it's not going to be displaying as much stuff. Okay, so you can see the table shorter because it's not displaying the wheels, it's not displaying the extension arms, etc. But it's still fairly lengthy. So now I'm going to dive deeper into this table assembly. So let's look at this. And maybe all I'm concerned about is this end cap assembly. So I'm going to right click on end cap assembly and say suppress all except selected. And notice what happens. So I'm basically creating my sheet kind of in my assembly level, my assembly structure. So instead of displaying this whole table assembly, all I'm displaying now is this end cap assembly. Okay, So I just glanced over at the chat, and thank you for using the 3 asterisks, Patrick. He asked a question, is it possible to do a staggered section cut? I will show that, yes. So I will definitely show that when we get into the section view section. No pun intended. Okay, so now you'll notice my views are very, very small. So I'll click on this view here, right mouse click, and edit that guy. And instead of 1 to 8, let's try maybe like 1 to 2. Because this is kind of the parent, the children views also update to that scale also. In fact, if I came in here and like clicked on this view here and said edit view, you'll notice it says scale 1 to 2 from parent. So now, when it updated, you can kind of see it sort of made the balloons kind of crowded and all that kind of stuff. We will talk about that. I'm going to change this view to shaded. And now we get kind of this shaded view. So let's take a look at these balloons. So you can kind of see they're pointing to different objects, and they're got multiple numbers and all that kind of stuff, and that has to do with the level here. If I look at my table, it's kind of broken down almost like a ladder diagram, so you can see the very top level is this table assembly. Underneath that we have this end cap assembly. Underneath the end cap assembly, we're kind of laddering down or stepping down. We have, you know, the end cap. Let me expand this guy open so you can see that. We have the end cap cover, so you can kind of see those there. And then we have a sub-assembly called hardware. And if I expand that open, here's all these individual pieces of hardware. So the Phillips, the hex nut, etc. And you can see there's 3 of each in there. And then we have this leg support plate, which is a sheet metal part, and it has some tabs. And then finally we have this handle mount, and there's 2 of those. So that's kind of what these numbers mean. They're kind of like stepping down and showing the level, almost like an outline if you want to think of it that way. I'm going to quickly just move these balloons a little bit, just kind of out of the way, like so. And you'll, oops, didn't mean to move my view. Let's grab on that guy. Now you'll notice this one's like reaching all the way across, and this one's crossing over and all that kind of stuff. So we will talk about or show this here in just a second. So I'm just going to kind of move these balloons around. Now I'm going to start saying, okay, I want to move this arrow. And if I click on this arrow, you'll see that little dot. And I can see, you know, it's pointing to this gray part right here. So I'm just going to move that dot. So I'm just going to click and drag until it's pointing to the silver part over here. Same thing with this guy. I might drag this point and maybe, you know, we put it there. And you'll notice when I'm dragging these around, it's actually doing like these automatic snapping. It's going to snap to a corner. If I get kind of near the middle, you'll see that little triangle. It's trying to snap to a midpoint. So it allows you to very quickly and easily make things look nice. I want to go right to the middle of this part right there, and there it is. Okay, maybe I bring this balloon down just a little bit, so it's over here, and I want the arrow to kind of be down there. So I'm just going to click on that little dot, drag it there, and there we go. And that looks, to me, much nicer instead of having the stuff crossing over. So same thing with this. I might just move this number down. So it's pointing to that particular object, and that's pointing to that particular object. And maybe we move that so it's more centered to the, let's do like maybe here, for example, and move that up. So you can reposition your arrows that are automatically created. I'm going to talk about repositioning the balloons a little bit later in a different sheet. But you can kind of see how that looks a little bit better. Okay. Now I want to see some more information. So I'll go ahead and create a projected view. This is my main or my base view. So I'm going to click on that. And you'll notice if I move kind of to the upper right, it kind of matches that view right there. If I go to the upper left, I get that view. So just by moving around, I'm going to get different projections. So I kind of like this projection here. Well, I want it to be over here, but obviously that doesn't work. So I'm going to click over here, say OK. Then I can just move that view. I'm just clicking and dragging it over here. I'll edit this view, make it shaded. And if I wanted to, you'll notice I can see the screws here. I can also see these metal handle tubes a lot better than I can see it right here. That's what it's kind of pointing to. So what I can do is come in here and just click on the balloon. I'll click on this little part right here and place my balloon. And you can notice it's the exact same number. Okay. I could do the same thing with my hardware here. I might just click on that screw and place the balloon like so. And then what I typically do is I don't need to have duplicates, so I might remove that one. I'm just going to select it and hit delete. Same thing with the screw. I might come in here and just delete that guy there. So in this view, we can see the nut. In this view, we can see the screw, for example, or the bolt. Okay. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and show some other new functionality here. Hopefully everybody's having a good time and learning stuff. I'm going to create a center mark on this view right here. So I'll go ahead and click on these circles like so, and I'm going to throw a dimension between these two studs. So you can kind of see there's my dimension. I'm in millimeters, so it's showing that dimension in millimeters. But notice on the screen, my balloon numbers are fairly large. My table is a little hard to read. It's kind of small. And then I've got this text here. My dimension text is fairly small compared to like these numbers. So this is some new functionality that we recently added. I'm going to expand open my document settings right here. And here's where I can pick what font and then this text height group. And notice it's set to medium. If I click on the little icon next to it, it says change text height group. So I'm going to click on that. Now, here's something little, but we think it's pretty cool. Notice I clicked on the text height group. It's only showing the text stuff. It's not showing me my primary units, my line widths, or whatever. It could have had this whole thing open, but depending on what I click on, in fact, let me cancel out. If I do like leading zeros, if I click on that, you'll notice text is folded down, and now it's only showing the stuff that has to do with the units, like leading and trailing zeros and stuff. So kind of a neat enhancement that we put in there. So I'll do that text height. And notice it says medium. And then it shows us what the text height is, small, medium, and large. So 0.1, 0.12, and 0.24. Now I have the ability to come in here and say make it small. I'll say OK, and you'll see things get really small. Kind of hard to see. I'll set that back to medium. And you do have to say OK to see the change. But what I really like is I can now come in and say custom. And I have the ability to change what's my small text height, what's my medium text height, and what's my large text height. So I might come in here and say, you know what, I want my small to be 0.12, I want my medium to be 0.24, and I want my large to be 0.24, for example. I'll go ahead and say OK, and now you'll see some changes. So now you can see my dimension is about the same size as my balloon text, and my table obviously got much larger, and we're going to talk about fixing this table here in just a second. But it gives you the control over specifying how big these fonts or this text is, which we didn't have the ability before. Okay, so once again, that was under text height group and under custom. And you can come in and change this all you want. So now what about this table that grew suddenly? Well, I'm going to go ahead and just click on the table, and a bunch of things happen here. So it kind of highlights blue, and you'll see all of these little dots, and then you'll see this blue triangle. I'm going to talk about this triangle here in a little bit, but what I'm going to do is just change the width of this table by clicking on this dot right here. I'm just going to drag to the right. Now you'll notice the table's getting bigger, but the columns really aren't changing or anything like that. But now I can come in and say, you know what, I don't need material to be quite so wide, so I'm going to drag that over a little bit. In fact, I could probably go even further. Description, you'll notice, is totally empty. We'll come back to that here in a second. Part number has a bunch of stuff, so I'm going to drag this, and now you can kind of notice as I'm moving this, it's basically word wrapping. So instead of having to be like 3 lines or whatever for that, it's going to be able to fit on, you know, 1 or 2 lines. So I'm just going to keep dragging that over a little bit. And then same thing with like my quantity and finally my item. So I'll drag that. And you can see just by changing that, it gives me more room, and I'll just make this a little bit wider, because right now I want these to be all on one line. So I'm going to drag that over, and sure enough, you can see how now these are all on one line basically. Now, what about my description? There's nothing displayed here. So I'm going to double click on my table, and this allows me to specify a couple things. For example, we're displaying all level, so it's showing every single part that's in this assembly that's on this sheet. I could set it back to first level, and it would basically, this would be a very small table. It would only say, you know, like end cap assembly basically. I can specify which direction the table goes. In this case, it's going up. Okay, but then right here you'll see we have what is displayed, and I can actually turn off the description, and we now turned off description. I could turn on mass. I could move mass to be right after the quantity, for example, or whatever. So you have some flexibility here on what you want displayed. I could say display the part name, so it would display the part name. So, okay. By doing that, it reset my settings or whatever, but you get the idea. So, and then I can also specify how big this table is just by changing those font heights or that text height. So I can make this a smaller text if I wanted to. Now you'll notice it still is covering up this view, and this is where that blue diamond comes into play. Not a lot of people know this, but watch what happens when I click and drag on this diamond. It's actually like making the table go from 1 to 2, and if I keep going, you'll see it'll jump over and actually go to 3 tables. So I'm just going to move it till I'm like maybe like here, for example, and now I have, it's kind of like folded it over, and I have 2 tables. It's still the same data, but instead of going all the way up and cutting into my view right here, I've just kind of expanded that table to the right. So thumbs up if you like that one. If you didn't know about that, let us know. I'm hoping to share some tips and tricks that you might not know about. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so let's talk about these balloons. I've already shown how you can move them around just by clicking and dragging on them and stuff. But maybe I want to line them up. Maybe I want to renumber them, etc. And that's under Tables, Align Balloons. So check this out. I'm going to say Align Balloons. And I'm going to pick that number, and that number. And then I'm going to hit Enter. And notice it now says Specify Start Point. So maybe I'll start over here, and then I'm going to start to move. And you'll notice I can line them up perfectly straight, or I could even have them kind of follow the direction of my isometric view. So I could do something like that, for example. And those are all now lined up. I could do the same thing with these two. I'll hit Enter. I'll say let's start right there and go like that. And they're kind of, now with only two balloons, it's not that exciting, but you can kind of see how you can realign those balloons. Okay. And then keep them nice and straight. So it's really up to you. And like I showed before, you could do the same thing, Enter, let's start maybe here, and then just keep them in a straight line like so. It's totally up to you on how you want to do that. I can also renumber. So I'm going to come in here and say renumber. I'll move this just a little bit. And I'm just going to click on that right there. And I should probably move this so you can kind of see the table. So as I click on these, you can see it's renumbering them to 2, to 3, to 4, etc. It's renumbering all of these. Okay. If I wanted to. So now you can see I can change the number. I can specify what the number is. I want it to be 8. I'll go ahead and click on that one there, and you can see now they're all 8, for example. Okay. I can also, let me renumber balloon. If I change it from automatic to balloon, notice it says level, first level. So that's changing that first number. So we saw it going 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Well, I don't want to change the first number. I want to change the trailing number. So I'm going to come in here and say last level. And I can click on here. You can see now that says .1. And watch the table as I'm doing this. Now, you'll notice a lot of these grayed out, and only this other one is available. And this is kind of a simple example. Think of a lot more parts. But it's basically saying, hey, you can't renumber these because this is a different subassembly. Only this part and this part are in the hardware assembly. So you can see that's now 1 and that's now 2. So I'll do that again over here. So let's do renumber balloon. This is 2, right? So I'm going to change it to last level. I'll click on that, and you can see that is now 1, and that is now 2. Okay? And the table updates automatically as I'm doing that. So I don't have very many parts in this subassembly, so there's not a lot of balloons to click on, but you could imagine how you could keep going around and renumbering these. If this was 2, and the next one was 5, and the next one was 3, and then 7, and then 4, right? You'd probably want to make them maybe go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever as you're going around. So, okay. You'll notice there's a sheet metal part on here, and I want to create a sheet metal flat representation on this drawing. And this stumps a lot of people. Like, how do I show my sheet metal part? Well, right here we can see here's that leg support. I'm going to expand that open. But there's nothing in here like create a flat view or anything like that. So how do I do this? Check this out. I'm going to go back to my 3D model. Okay. I'll click on this part and it tells me it's in the table assembly. So I'll expand, open that table assembly. Oops, didn't mean to click. It shows me it's in the end cap assembly. So I'll expand that open. Or another tip, I could double click on it, right mouse click on it, and say find in browser. And it's going to expand that open and highlight that it's in this leg support plate. So let me expand that open, and here is that leg support plate. And we can see it's a sheet metal part and it has this flat pattern. If I right click on flat pattern, I can say activate, or I can just click the little radio button, and here I am in a flat pattern representation of that sheet metal part. Now I want to add this to my drawing. So how do I do that? I just right click on my flat pattern and say create drawing. Now some of you might think, well, I don't want to create a whole new drawing. So that's where this comes into play. We're finally going to show this. Notice it says drawing, create new. Well, I don't want to create a new drawing. I'm going to click on there and you can see untitled. Now I haven't saved our drawing yet, but you'll notice it says untitled. So I'm going to select that. Now it says sheet. Do you want to create a new sheet, or do you want to put it on an existing sheet that's in that drawing? Well, I want it to be on sheet 2, and you'll notice how it kind of grays this out. Because sheet 2 is already created, it knows what units, it knows what sheet size, etc. I'm going to say OK, and I now have a flat representation of the sheet metal part on this sheet. I'll go ahead and do shortened. There we go. So hopefully, if you didn't know that we could do this, you now saw that we can. And this is the question I get quite often, where it's like, I just want to put something different on a sheet. And I'm actually going to kind of take this to the next level and show how you can do multiple different parts on the same sheet, etc. So this is kind of the lead into that. So I'm going to, let's say I want to create a bend table for this. I can just click on table. I'll select this view, and it's going to automatically create a bend table for me. So I'll place it here. And just like before, it's kind of narrow or whatever. I'm just going to drag this across, snap it to that corner right there. And as I start to move these, you're going to see that the table will get smaller, like so. However, it is still overlapping. And just like I did over here, I could, now I'm not going to, but I could move here, and you can kind of see how it's going to move to the left, like so, and stretch across. So you can do it with the part table, you can do it with the bend table also. So obviously in this case, I might need to move some views around, make them fit a little bit nicer or whatever, maybe move some balloons around, etc. to get the representation that I want. Just like so. Okay. So, a lot of information on this sheet, obviously. So, okay. I'm going to go ahead and create another sheet here real quick. Let me look at the chat. Okay, so AL asked, will this part renumbering carry over to the next sheet? or is it local to the current sheet? It is local to the current sheet. We don't carry things over to another sheet, unfortunately. Now, what I'm about to show is how you can do multiple different representations on multiple different sheets, and this is where I think the magic really happens. So I'm going to do a base view. This looks familiar, but I'm going to change this. Instead of model, I'm going to pick one of my storyboards. Now, where did these come from? This is when I talked about doing exploded views with this assembly. So I'm going to pick the last one that I did, which was the storyboard 8. So this is an exploded representation of this assembly. Gives me a nice kind of preview what that's going to look like. Orientation, I'm going to do kind of an isometric here. So I'll do this northwest isometric. Okay, place it kind of right here in the middle. I'll just say okay. Now, unfortunately, I'm not a huge fan of this orientation, this northwest isometric as kind of an exploded direction. It doesn't really make my exploded view look all that great. So here is another cool tip. You're not limited. Let me start over here. Let me edit this view. You're not limited to what you see here. You can create custom orientations. So I'm going to switch back to my 3D model. I'll finish my flat pattern. And I'm going to orient this until I kind of get it the direction I want. So the drawing looks like that, right? It's the, whatever this is, 30, 30, 60, or 45, 45, 60, or whatever it is, I don't remember. But I want it to be kind of more sitting a little bit flat like this. I can maybe rotate it just ever so slightly until I'm kind of happy with what I like. And then if I scroll up here, under named views, I'm going to expand this open. Right mouse click, new named view. And you'll notice, there it is. And I could call this, new ISO or something like that. So what does this do? Well, if I click on top, it's going to go to top. If I click on home, it's going to go to home. But if I click on new ISO, it's going to go to that exact orientation. You can even right mouse click on it and say update. So if you change the angle ever so slightly, I could right mouse click and say update that named view, and that's what it's going to capture. But I'm going to do that one there. Okay, now the catch with this is we've made a change. I can tell that by this little asterisk. So I need to save this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And then I'm going to jump back into my drawing. Notice when I come back into my drawing, this little warning symbol. And it says, in fact, you see now it came up with this warning. Changes have been made. You can update the drawing from the button up in the application bar. That's exactly what it's talking about. Now, you're not going to see anything happen. I'm going to click on it. It's going to use the latest version, which is now version 30. But you're not going to see anything change here yet. But we are now linked. Everything's up to date. Okay. But what I can do now is let's edit this view. I'll click on this orientation, and there is my new ISO. And I'm going to click on that, and it's going to represent this exploded view in that orientation, which I like much better. And I'll go ahead and turn it to shaded, for example, say okay. I could scale it up if I needed to, but notice things look a little bit more lined up, a little bit better in this orientation. So my tip there is that you can create custom representations. That is a really good way to create views of parts that are not lined up with the real world. So like if I did a front view projection of this, it's going to be at some weird funky angle. Well, I could come in here and say, look at that tab. And now, you know, there's stuff in the way, these legs are in the way. But I'm looking straight at that tab. I could capture that as a new named view and use that as my front view. So just a little tip, and it was kind of hard to see because it was kind of behind the leg there, but we were looking straight at that face. Okay, I'll go back home. There we go. Okay, let me continue on here. So now what I want to do is, I don't want this whole assembly, maybe I just want the wheel assembly. So just like I did before, I could come here, right click and say suppress all except selected. And it's going to change this representation and show only the wheel assembly. So it's turned these other ones off. Let me scale this guy real quick. Let's just do maybe like a 1:2. Okay. And so now I'm just displaying an exploded representation of just the wheel assembly. I don't have to do the whole thing. I didn't have to come in here and click all these off. I used that suppress all except for selected. Let me do a quick table. I'll do it in this upper left corner. Again, we're using this custom text size, so that's why things are a little bit bigger. Now you'll notice I just made a mistake. This is a tip I was going to show later. I dragged that table off, and now it's no longer in that corner. And if I try and drag this back, you'll notice it doesn't want to snap to that corner. I could get close, but it's not going to be exact, right? So here's a cool tip. Use the move command. I want to move this table, and notice it has this transform point to point. And now I can say grab that point and that point there, and it'll snap right to it. Okay, so I'll just make this a little bit bigger. And so you notice it's remembering my last settings, so it's showing the mass, etc. Item, quantity. Okay. There we go. Okay. Notice it automatically created these balloons for me, and I did it as one level. If I were to double click on here and say all levels, it looks like that, but you'll notice it didn't do the nut, the washer, and the shaft. Well, why is that? Well, this washer is already numbered, so, and that's a quantity of it. Same thing with the nut, it's already numbered, but it didn't do the shaft, so I'll go ahead and just click on that guy, place my balloon, realign my balloons. So just clicking through, have to hit enter. I'll start there and just do in kind of a nice, kind of the same direction as these other views. Okay, here's what I wanted to get to. This is where I can now create other views. So I'm going to say create a base view. Okay. I'm going to do a front view of the whole assembly, just like you see here. And I'm just going to go ahead and place it, say OK. And notice what happened over here. I now have two of these guys. So this is representing that view there. This is representing this view here. Okay, and I'm going to open the wheel assembly. And I'm just going to right click on wheel hub and say suppress all except for the wheel hub. And notice what I get. Now it's really small, so let's go ahead and scale that. In fact, let's see if we can do a 1-to-1 in this case. Sure enough, looks like that's going to fit. So I now have a view. In fact, I could create a projected view, maybe to the right like so. Maybe I want to do a section view of this guy. And I'm just going to go straight up like so, and like so. I'll say OK. And this is what I was talking about earlier. Notice, depending on which direction I move my cursor, the A arrows flip around. Well, it wants me to put it here. Well, now that's going to get kind of crowded because I need a lot more room over here for other stuff. So I'm just going to place it there. But now I can start to drag on this view. Hold down my shift key, or hit my shift key, sorry, and I could move this to a different location if I needed to. So maybe I'll put it here, for example. I'll grab these views and move them slightly down. I can grab, I'm just clicking and dragging, by the way. I can move that text around. So now I have my section view right above my section line, which I think looks fine. So kind of a cool tip. Okay, I'm going to do the exact same thing again. I'm going to say create a base view, place it over here somewhere, say OK, and I now have a third representation. In fact, you can see the :3, :2. So this one here is representing these views. This one here is representing this view here. Okay. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to expand open the wheel assembly, and I'm just going to right mouse click on the wheel shaft and say suppress all except for the selected. And I see that. So let's fix that. I'm going to right mouse click, edit my view, change the scale real quick, 1-to-1, and instead of a front representation, let's do a right representation. In fact, still a little small. Let's do 2-to-1 right here. I'll close that out, move this view over a little bit. Well, now, I mean, I kind of like the 2-to-1 scale, but there's not a lot of room to show like an end view. So here is something fairly new. We can now do what's called broken views. So I'm going to click on break view. And what this allows you to do, it's asking for a drawing view. So I'm going to click on this base view here. And then you see this black line. Well, I want to remove maybe from there to about there. I'll say OK. And we just broke that view. And in fact, let me undo. I'm going to undo back real quick just to show you the power of this. I'm going to create a quick dimension from there over to here. So we can see that that's 180 millimeters. I'll do that broken view again here. So I'll just go maybe from there to there. I'll say OK. And it still shows as 180 millimeters. And even the extension line of the dimension shows that that's a broken view. Now I could create my projected view off of that and, you know, have enough room. So hopefully you're kind of seeing the power of this. I have like an exploded shaded view with parts labeled and stuff, but now I have kind of the main parts, the shaft and the hub. You know, the tire, let's just say, is a purchased part or something like that, but we're manufacturing the shaft or manufacturing the hub. I could add dimensions on here. I could have a lot of information on this one sheet. Okay, so we are quickly running out of time. One of the other tips I really wanted to talk about were drawing templates. Now I've already created a drawing template, so let me just open this guy up so you can kind of see what it is. I highly recommend that you use drawing templates. They're easy to create, and you'll notice I have basically 4 sheets. So the very first sheet is like a shaded isometric, and that's it. On my second sheet, I have an exploded representation. I've got a table at the top. On my third sheet, I've got a single component, and it's showing hidden lines, shaded view in the upper right corner. I've added some general notes down here. And then finally, I have a sheet metal sheet that shows a flat pattern, a folded shaded representation, a table, etc. So how did I do this? Well, you just come up here and you say new drawing template. You can specify, what's your standard, what's your units, what's your default size. I'll say C size. And I'm going to do this really quick because we are going to go over. This hour goes by so fast. But notice this on my cursor. It's this representation. So you can see we can show an assembly, a single component, a sheet metal component, a flat pattern, or a storyboard. So I'm going to say assembly. I want it to be shaded. I want it to be maybe this northeast isometric. I'm going to say scale it automatically, and I'm going to place that right there. And that's all I want on this particular sheet. Then I'll do another sheet, create my base view, and instead of an assembly, I might say I want a component. I want a front view. I want it to be hidden lines. Maybe I want my tangent lines to be shortened, etc. So I'll say OK. And I could create my projected views off of this. I'm basically just kind of building a quick template. Then I will, edit this view, tell it I want it to be shaded, etc. I could add my general notes, blah, blah, blah. So that's basically what I'm doing here. And you save that. So once you have that saved, such as we do here, I can now use this drawing template. So you could also have your custom title block. You could have your logo in here. You could have any notes or symbols that you might need. That's my template. And now I could come over here, and I could do this with any assembly. It doesn't have to be this miter saw. It could be my pencil sharpener. It could be whatever. And I can come in and say I want to create a new drawing from design. And actually, before I do that, let's just do, I'm going to just isolate just this wheel assembly just to kind of speed things up. So I'm just going to use that template for this wheel assembly. So I'll do drawing from design. Okay. And now, instead of a template from scratch, I could come in and say, I want to use that drawing template I just created. And notice things kind of grayed out because it has the units and the sheet size, etc. I want to do all level, and I'll say OK, and that's all I have to do, and it's going to use that template. Now it's not 100% perfect. You're going to see this. It's actually going to create multiple sheets, and I'm going to have to tweak some of them, but it's doing the work for me automatically. So if I switch back, you're going to see these sheets getting created at the bottom. And it takes a few seconds as it goes through and does this. But I'm not having to type my general notes. I'm not having to create, change everything to shaded every single time for my isometric views. So you can kind of see it's going through and building these sheets for me. Okay. Okay. So notice like now it's doing the individual components and it's showing my general notes. So once it's all said and done, it'll kind of jump back to the first sheet. So it created all of these sheets for me. Now it did an auto scale, so I might have to come in here and say, you know what, I want that to be a 2:1 instead of a 1:2 or something like that. But notice it's shaded, it's all the settings that I want. Then I have some sheets. In this case it's empty. This one here is empty. This is basically a copy of the original one. And then I have this exploded view. So I'm going to just select these 3 sheets and say delete. I now have this. I could, if I wanted to, come in here and say I want that to be all levels, whatever. You know, it's going to do that for me automatically. Now, again, notice it's showing everything, but all I have to do is suppress all except this wheel assembly, and it'll fix that for me. There we go. I'll keep going through. So this was a different exploded view that makes no sense, but it found it, so it created it. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to delete that sheet. And now I'm to my individual components where they show the hidden views. It's got my general notes. It's a top, front, right. They're automatically scaled. Here it's showing a sub-assembly. I don't really need that, so I'm going to delete that. Notice my washer is much larger than the wheel because it did the auto scaling for me. And I might come in here and say, you know what, I don't want to anodize my washer, so I can still come in and edit these guys. And I'm just going to remove that note on this sheet. It's still on the other sheets, but I can come in and, you know, tweak with them. In fact, I noticed that this nut is kind of facing the wrong direction. So I might just come in and say, instead of a front, let's show it from the back. And now I get that representation. Maybe I don't want to show it with hidden lines or whatever, but I didn't have to create all those sheets automatically. It did it for me. So, okay, here's another cool tip. We are definitely going over. I want to make sure I only have like 3 or 4, and they're very short. The other thing I wanted to show is, let me close this guy up. This document settings is where I showed you can do like your leading zeros, trailing zeros, font sizes, etc. But then you'll notice another gear called sheet settings. And this is for this individual sheet. Right now it's set to D size. I could come in here and change that, and I could say, you know what, I want that to be on a B size sheet. Right? I could, you know, scale this guy down or whatever. So let's just do a 1:1. Move those around. So I'm able to change my individual sheets if I want to. Move my text if necessary, etc., etc. But if I go here, this is going to be a D size sheet. If I go here, that's going to be a B size sheet. So you are able to come in and change the size sheet that you want. You even have the ability to change what title block is displayed. So you might even have like an ISO title block, or you might have an English title block. So, okay, so here's another tip that I use a lot. Let me see if I can find a good representation. Let me go back here. Okay, so here's a cool tip. So I like to create center marks, and sometimes and I'm going to delete this section view just so it's a little bit easier to see what's going on. So I'm going to say center mark. I'm going to click on this circle right here, and you'll notice it just does a little tiny plus. Well, I want those bigger arms to extend out. Well, if I click on like this circle, it's pretty tiny. Right? So here's a neat trick. Oops. Use the Centermark pattern. I'm going to go ahead and hover over this edge and notice what I get. Now it's asking for more arcs or circles or whatever. I'm just going to say okay, and I get a much larger representation. So I'll use this Centermark pattern, even though we're not patterning anything, I'll use that to get the larger crosshairs. And then here's another tip. I'm going to do a center line between that edge and that edge, and I get a center line that goes like this. Well, now I can click on it and grab this arrow, and you'll notice it's only doing one at a time. Well, if I hold down my shift key, it's going to do both at the same time. So usually I would just do one, and then I'd come over here and I would do the other one until it looked good or whatever. Well, now you can drag, hold down the shift key, and it's going to do it on both sides. So, okay. And then lastly, the last tip, when you're doing dimensions, you know, you can basically click on points, for example, to place the dimension. If I right mouse click, notice I have, if you're coming from like AutoCAD, they're called O-snaps or object snaps. You'll see endpoint, midpoint, intersections, quadrants, etc. So for example, I don't know why you would want to do this, but I'm going to say quadrant, and I'm going to hover over the circle, and you can see it's going to snap to the quadrant. So I'm just going to go ahead and click there, and it grabbed that point. Then I'm going to come over here and say quadrant and click there, and I now have a dimension that's going right to those quadrants, for example. I could do tangents, I could do midpoints, etc. So there's a lot of functionality in here that you might want to try out. That's kind of hidden in there. Okay, let me look at the chat really quick. I know we went over. Okay, so Patrick asked, can you change the style of the broken lines at this time? No. You can do some pretty cool stuff with it. Like you can have multiple broken lines. I did just one vertically. I could have done multiple ones vertically, and you can also do horizontal ones. So if like you had a big panel of something and you just wanted to show the four corners, you can actually break in multiple directions. Somebody did ask the question about the section line. Yes, you can go in multiple directions. So for example, I could, I'm just going to go up from the center here. So I'm just hovering to kind of get that snap point. So I'll go there, I'll go to this point here, and then I'm going to go to this point here and just kind of expand out, say OK, and it will let me create a section representation like that. And there's even other tips that I didn't show, like where you're showing full, a slice, like so, or a particular distance. So you get different options there, but I'll go ahead and say OK, and it will show a section kind of going in that general direction. So, okay. I'm looking really quick. Don't see any more questions. There might be some that are buried. I know we've gone a little bit over. So if I will scan through those and answer them into the chat of the YouTube video. So maybe check back in a little bit. So with that, I hope you learned some cool tips and tricks. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give us a thumbs down. Leave comments in the YouTube video. We do read them, and have fun fusioning. Thank you.